So my name is Mena. I'm an assistant lecturer at Zagazig University in Egypt, and I'm a PhD student here at the Welsh School of Architecture. This research is part of my PhD research with my supervisors, Dr. Sam Clark and Dr. Dikaios Sakellariou, who can't be here today. So let's get started. So historically, and in architecture practice, if we look at our targeted audience, who do we design for? We will find that we are usually designing for an able-bodied man, someone who is really able and male probably. So historically, from Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man to the modular man of Le Corbusier, we have that subconscious idea of that person that we design for. However, with time, we can find that if we have a look at any of our buildings, we can easily find that we are now considering more people. We can see ramps, we can see lifts for people who have a physical impairments. We can also see tactile pavements and glass safety stickers. This is working, okay. And glass safety stickers for people who have visual impairments. But is this enough? Is physical impairments and visual impairments are the only disabilities around there? So that's what really concerned me. That's what started my PhD. I was more concerned about hidden disabilities. What are we doing for them? Are we really designing places that are inclusive enough for them? So the research problem is really multi-layered. So it started historically with people who have learning disability that they don't have self-advocacy. People with learning disabilities were considered as people who cannot speak for themselves. So their carers or doctors would speak for them, but nothing, they won't have a conversation with them. So later, when the building standards and regulation were being set, there wasn't conversation with these people. So we can see that people who have physical impairments have stand up for their rights, but this doesn't happen for someone with a learning disability. So later, when it came to us as an architects and as designers, we had, in a way, short-handed disability into only physical impairment, which is really a cruel shorthand. So I want to understand the accessibility need of people who have a learning disability through their own perspective. I don't want to listen to doctors or carers, with all due respect, but I'm aiming more to focus to the people themselves. So the methodology is that I had a look at the clinical perspective. What does it mean to have a learning disability medically? And then I had done interviews with people who have a learning disability to understand their perspective more. So I've been saying disability a lot. So disability is an umbrella term for any impairments, activity limitation, and participation restrictions. And I really like this definition. It's by WHO, because this definition has two sides. First of all is a social model of disability, which means that disability is not the medical condition. Disability is that what context give to me. So I might not be disabled, but my context is disabling me. So for example, I don't need to have a disability. If I'm seeing a sign that I can't understand while I'm able-bodied person, that is disabling in itself. You don't have to have a medical condition to be disabled. And the second part of disability is the medical part of disability, which is how people with disability, unfortunately, are being treated by. So learning disability is around 30% of the world population. It's a quarter of the disabled community around the world. And people with learning disability, it's really hard to recognize. So if you can meet someone with a learning disability and don't have a clue that they have a learning disability. The second thing is it's really hidden, and it's also individual. So it's not the same. Everyone has their own condition. So they can find some difficulty understanding complicated information, learning new skills, looking after themselves, and some of the everyday activities. So if you have a look at these attributes, you can see that this might be a problem in how they perceive our buildings and our design. So how does the learning disability, how does the attributes we just mentioned affect the experience of people with learning disability? So if we're looking first at the medical perspective, we can see that the medical perspective of learning disability depends on two things. First is the intellectual ability, which is measured by the IQ. And second is the adaptive functions, which is affected by, conceptual functions, practical and social. So conceptual is things related to the language, reading, maps, and wayfinding, you can see. Practical is more of the managing money, the job and the learning. Social is more related to social judgment and empathy. So if we have a look at the previous literature, which is really concise, if you search learning disability in architecture, you will hardly find anything. So, but in the previous literature, it's not only limited, but also it have been studied from the perspective of the doctors and the carers. So no one has talked to the people or discussed their needs with them. Not in architecture, however, we can find that conversation in other disciplines, such as computer application, for example, or mobile applications. So in the previous literature, we can find that people with learning disability have a problem in wayfinding that includes signs, maps, and other facilities to aid wayfinding. And they also have some barriers in spatial characteristic of the buildings, which that include the atmosphere and the simplicity, ease of movement, the colors and textures, and also on the facilities of the building, which is privacy, literacy, stigma, and the temporal demands of them. So previously, what I have just when I reviewed the literature, when I saw this stuff, I saw that this is not enough. And I didn't think that these things really reflect the needs of people with learning disabilities. So I did walking interviews and deep interviews with them to really understand what they want or what are the barriers they face. These are my results from my walking interviews. So first thing, can you guess what coffee shop is this? What brand it is? It's Costa. So one important thing I found is familiarity. People with learning disability would really appreciate familiarity on every scale, from people to colors and decoration. So many of them really favor Costa because you can predict when you enter Costa. You can predict the drink, you can predict colors, you can predict materials. So that sort of prediction really aid their overall perception. So that was one of the important things. And as I said, it was multi-leveled. So it wasn't only for a specific cafe. It was also, for example, they would favor the shops that will not change their merchandise location, which I know is a big thing for commercials. Second thing, escape spaces. People with learning disability, at some point, they might need escape space, some quiet area to take break, to have a rest from our hectic world now. So some of them might settle down with just a chair, to be honest. Some of them really need a room. Some of them will go to a quieter coffee shop or a space. So there is a level of escape spaces, but it is always needed. Another point is some characteristic in the center had made it better for them. So for example, having plenty of toilets, having options so they can choose whether they want to use escalators, elevators, or stairs, and also having some sort of safety and security in a building that makes it more inclusive for them than being in the street without any of these facilities. Another important thing, which I totally agree with in the previous literature, is wayfinding. Wayfinding is a big issue for someone with a learning disability because they have trouble in reading and remembering. So signs can be really confusing with them, especially here in Wales with the bilingual signs. So it confuses me. So I think it's confusing for many of us anyway. So and the really important thing about science is that many of the people who have learning disability doesn't have the confidence to ask for directions. So they won't ask for the directions. So if they can't find signs, they won't get to where they want to go. So, and that can be really frustrating. Another thing is that some of the space configuration may be really helping with them. So they tend to not like crowds. So if the place is more open, if the place is more, it's not really intimate, they can feel that their intimate space is not invaded, so that it's more comfy for them. And in addition, if we can add to that, labeling entrances and exits so people don't bump into you, that may also help them. User preferences, I saw that they really prefer natural lighting and more colorful and decorative places. So this is just a comparison between, if we remember that from the medical perspective, it's 3 adaptive functions: conceptual, social, and practical. So we can see that, so I have colored what each of the previous literature and my findings reflect through these adaptive functions. So they overlap. So they necessarily overlap. I'm not denying the importance of a medical perspective, but what I'm saying is that my interviews had added to that. So in conclusion, so we can not only use medical perspective to judge a condition or disability. And yes, there is a huge gap in architecture design guideline for people with learning disability, but mainly it focuses on the clinical perspective, which is not enough to totally create an inclusive environment. Thank you.